Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I'm Amber Larkins, your host, and today I have with me Mr. Jim Cooper. Now, he was a caretaker for his wife who had cancer, and he's going to get into sharing some of his story and just that experience with us. And I know that cancer is a really, really devastating disease, and I know that a lot of families are faced with it. So Jim, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
I appreciate you having me on. I love sharing the story, and the more I can share the story, hopefully the more people I can reach. So I am very honored to be a guest on your podcast.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I think every story has power and impact, and I'm thankful for everybody that shares, because it's easy sometimes, I think, for people to feel alone when they're going through certain situations, and just to know you're not alone. And, life is full of ups and downs and struggles, and we have to learn to navigate those things. And I'm excited to jump into your experience and hear your journey and how you've been able to kind of process through that experience. So without further ado, do you want to just kind of jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself and what's led you here?
Sure. I'm mostly retired at the moment. I spent a lot of years doing many different things. My career was like a chutes and ladders game gone berserk. I mean, I was worked in a photo shop. I worked in real estate. I've been on the radio. Just a little bit of everything, and I've kind of landed a few years ago into the voiceover realm. So I do voiceovers of audiobooks and that kind of thing. About 9 years ago now, it was 2014, my wife was diagnosed with brain cancer, which in and of itself was a traumatic event, and it was kind of doubled by the fact of how we were told it was cancer. It was one of those unfortunate things where the person that told us really wasn't a cancer person, and this person, it was a physician, was talking to one of his minions on the side, and we were in the room, and we'd gone through about 6 months of trying to figure out what was going on with my wife. Her arms were moving by themselves. She had a terrible time talking. She would lose words, and it wasn't a good situation. And originally they thought it was MS, so we were going down that road, and this MS guy did a spinal tap and all the other things that you normally do. When we went to his office one day to get the results, and he's talking to this young woman who's an intern, I guess, talking to her, and just looks at us and goes, "It's lymphoma." Then he goes back to talking to her and keeps talking to her, and our jaws just hit the ground. I mean, we had no clue what that meant. I mean, I kind of knew it was cancer. Sally, who was my wife, wasn't even sure what lymphoma meant. But it's the interesting thing is that when you get that diagnosis, all your senses stop. You don't hear anything. It just becomes a blur, and it's like the world just shuts down, and everything you thought your life was going to be going forward has just changed completely. So we had, my wife went through a lot with different doctors and different people, but one of the things that I try to tell other caregivers that I experienced firsthand was listen to your instincts, because we had no idea what this was about. We had no idea what the treatment was. We had no idea about any of it. But the hospital we got the diagnosis in, they were like, "Look, we've got to jump on this right away. This is an aggressive cancer." It took them 5 weeks to get to the test results, but now it's needs to be done immediately. And so we saw the oncologist there, and he said, this is what we're going to do, and blah, 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 and let's get you set up. And I was like, time out. We're going to process this for 24 hours, and I'll call you. I'll let you know. So we went home, and we were still kind of in a fog, and we got up the next morning, and I was like, well, let's call this guy. I can't think of anything else to do. And I picked up the phone and dialed the number in, and I could not hit the green send button. There was something in my head that was saying, this isn't right. So I closed the phone, and I said to Sally, I was like, this isn't right. Let's do something else. And she was like, absolutely. So we made a lot of phone calls to different people. And we are one of the fortunate ones where every contact we seemed to make was the right contact. And going through several different doctors and several different paths landed us at Sloan Kettering in New York. And anything that could have gone right went right. And I know that's not the case, especially with cancer. There's a lot of people where it doesn't go right all the time. So we consider ourselves very fortunate and very lucky, and going around, and there's a lot of different stories I could tell about our time in the hospital. But my wife had 12 chemo treatments, and she had to be inpatient for 3 to 4 days at that time to flush the chemo out. And then she did a stem cell transplant, which is 3 straight weeks in the hospital. So by the time we got done, it was like things had gone so well, and the people we'd met were just so outstanding. I said to my wife's neurologist, it's like, I got to give back. And I can't do it with money right now, but how can I get back? And at that time, they were just starting a caregiver to caregiver support group at Sloan. It was brand new, and they'd had a patient-to-patient one where patients could talk to each other and compare notes, but this was for caregivers. Caregivers were just starting to get some recognition. And so I joined that, and have worked with Sloan since, and it was a great organization. I got to talk to a lot of caregivers, and hopefully, and mostly, I got to listen to a lot of caregivers, because sometimes that's all you really need to be, is an ear to let someone just spout everything that's going on. And so that became a thing. And if you want me to shut up, just let me know. I'm just going to keep rambling.
No, I'm very intrigued. And I know that, like, so many people are faced with these things. People get diagnosed with cancer on a very regular basis. So people are faced with these kinds of same reactions, like, where do I go from here? And I'm fortunate that I've, at this point in my life, I've never had a huge, like, scare when it comes to health personally.
Right.
But I have seen my family go through it, and it's just good for people to see and know what that experience is like, because life is short and we don't know when we're going to get the same type of diagnosis.
Right.
And navigating through that is difficult. So I appreciate you sharing all of these things. How long was the process of treatment?
Of treatment itself, my wife's first treatment was Thanksgiving week 2014. And we were in the hospital for about 6 days because they had to do a lot of tests before they started giving her chemo. And it was interesting because we were in Manhattan on Thanksgiving Day, and, we're watching the parade, which is happening 3 streets over from the hospital. And it's like, well, can they get them reroute the parade down by the hospital? That way we can see it out the window. It was just kind of surreal that we were in the same place. But started then, and we finished up. It was July 10th, I think, was when we finally walked out, and when the stem cell transplant was done. And then there's a year after that of getting your immune system back, because with the stem cell transplant, they take all your immunities down to 0 and then give you your stem cells back. And that also wipes out all your childhood inoculations. So she had to go through all that. And that, takes a year to get your energy back and get back in gear. So it was the better part of 9-10 months. And we've just been then you start getting an MRI originally 3 months, and then it goes to 6 months, and now she just does it annually, gets an MRI annually just to peek under the hood to make sure everything's copacetic.
So I'm assuming today she's healthy.
She's doing very well. She's just past the 9-year clear point. So next year will be the big 10th anniversary, which she's looking forward to. So but no, she's come through it like a champ.
Mhm.
And like I said, everything that could have happened the way it was supposed to, which is not the normal route for a lot of people. And one of the things that I did that first week, Thanksgiving week, that we were in the hospital, was the first night we were there, and they had this this big chair that was it became like a transformer and turned into a bed, kind of thing. And that's where I slept. And I'm looking at the ceiling at 2 a.m. I'm not sleeping. I mean, my mind's going, what am I doing in a hospital in New York at 2 a.m. and Thanksgiving week? And so the thought hit me, because I'm an ersatz writer. I've got to start journaling about this. I've got to start writing about this. And at the time, this thought hadn't occurred to me, but what ended up happening was, not only was it a good outlet for me to get some of my thoughts and some of my feelings down on paper, it became a great way to keep family and friends, keep them informed, without having to make 15,000 phone calls every day. So it became kind of an ongoing thing through her entire cycle of treatment. And, it shocked the heck out of us. People came out of the woodwork. Our high school class started, liking and leaving comments in one of the social media pages. Like, we haven't talked to these people in 40 years, and they were there. And so many people were there and supported us that you just couldn't help but feel good about what was going on. So with me writing all that, at the end of it all, I was like, I've got to do something with this. And I wasn't sure exactly how to do it. I didn't want to just republish the Facebook post, because everyone's read those. So it took me a few years to kind of come to grips with how I could construct something that, A, people will want to read, it would be fun to read, and 2, can be useful and helpful to other caregivers. And so the latest book, the Not So Little Book of Cancer Caregiving, was born. And it just goes through all the different experiences that I had as a caregiver, using my wife's experiences as kind of backstory to all those experiences. And I'm really happy with the way it came out. And the people that have read it thus far have said either, this is wonderful, I'm glad I have this, or I wish I had this when I went through this experience. So I feel very gratified by that.
Mm-hmm. That's a great, I feel like it's a great way to show, like, to paint both sides, because you like to think that if someone's diagnosed with something like that everyone reaches out to them, like, hey, with the empathy and the sympathy and, and all the things. But sometimes I feel like caregivers can get overlooked when they're the one that is walking side by side, and it can be a difficult journey. I don't think it maybe is like that for everybody, but with your experience, what was that like?
I learned a whole heck of a lot. And probably one of the biggest things that I learned, and I had to learn it in stages over time, was that caregivers need to spend a lot of time in self-care, because you get focused and you're just on 24/7, and you feel like, this is my job to make sure everything's going. And the day after Thanksgiving, Sally's brother and sister and her uncle came up to see her at the hospital. And her uncle came up to me and said, come on, I'm taking you out to lunch. You need a break. I thought, break? What the hell are you talking about? I need a break. So he takes me outside, and we're walking around Manhattan. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. I needed a break. I needed to walk away from that for a little while. And that comes in different quantities at different stages. I know toward the very end, especially after the stem cell treatment, I did not take the time to decompress after all was said and done. and it was not. It was very damaging to my mental health. Fortunately, I had enough presence of mind. I got to a therapist who I'd seen previously, and we talked. We had just had a couple sessions and talked things through, and that was enough, and that got me back grounded again. So, one thing I tell other caregivers: there is no shame in going to see a therapist or a doctor. Talk to somebody. I don't care if it's your priest, your dog. It doesn't matter. You got to talk to somebody and talk this out so you can decompress, because otherwise you just get crazy. There was a woman in the hospital whose mother was going through cancer treatment, and her schedule is very similar to my wife's because we kept running into each other all the time. And she had flown in from Switzerland to be the caregiver for her mom, left her husband and her kids back in Switzerland, so she was kind of like on her own. And we kind of started talking and compared notes and kind of like ushered ourselves through this. And I remember walking down the hallway one day, and she was leaning up against the wall with her head down. And I know that's the universal signal for a caregiver who's just had enough. And so I walked up to her and I said, "What's going on?" And she's just like, it's like, "I can't do this. I can't do this." And I feel so guilty for doing that. And I was like, which happens to be one of the more pervasive emotions that comes up for caregivers. I was like, "Look, you're not Superman. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to power down." And we talked for a while, and we're still good friends. We still communicate all the time, but that's the kind of thing you start realizing. If you don't do the self-care thing, you're not going to do any good for yourself. And more importantly, you're not going to be any good for the patient who's relying on you to be the caregiver if you're crumbling down. So that aspect was something I had to learn and learn quickly, and it's a critical one for caregivers.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And as you're talking, I'm just going back in my own mind of like over the course of my life, the people that I've known that have been caregivers to someone that is, in whether it's a whatever type of state of sickness, whether it's
Right.
cancer or any type of thing. And the hospitals can be a traumatizing place just in and of themselves. They're not really conducive to like a lot of them that I've been in has not
Right.
conducive to these creative thoughts. And um you know I, I don't know, and I don't know if there's a solution to that. I do think that I can see how it affects caregivers and how it can affect, like, it's a traumatic experience.
Right.
And from everything, from the very point that somebody tells you you have cancer. And that is something that I would like to kind of bring back up, because you mentioned that when they first told you, it was just kind of like, this is it. And then we just turn and start looking at somebody else. And I feel like medical professionals, they really need training and empathy. I think some people have it naturally, and then other people, it's like a job. And they see a lot of this, and it's just like, and that's devastating because they forget that this kind of news is traumatic for people,
Right.
and it is life altering. And you're like, you're dealing with the shock of like, what's going on? How do I deal with this? And I'm
Right.
thankful that you took the time to say, we need some time to think about this. But can you elaborate a little bit about, maybe like, about the trauma that is endured from the time that you find this out to the journey that you go through? Just, do you still struggle with like, do you struggle at all with like PTSD, or do you still have like traumatic
Just
things
put
with
that on my
entering hospital?
forehead backwards. Yeah. I was thinking before we started talking, I was trying to roll through my mind of what were the most traumatic parts of this whole process. One was the way we were told, which is obviously, we've talked about that already. Another one was um, about 3/4 of the way through treatment. We were getting ready to have the stem cell transplant. It hadn't happened yet. And we got up one morning, and I was going to go into the office because things had kind of settled down by this point. And I'm in the bedroom, and all of a sudden I hear this crash in the bathroom. And I go in, and Sally's on the floor. And she's like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I was like, no, you're not. I'm fine means torpedoes are in the water. I've learned that very quickly, too. So we ended up going to the local ER because she was bleeding out her nose. She, I didn't know if she'd hit her head on the sink going down, what else was going on. And we got to the ER, and they're like, okay, we'll see you in a second. Come on, sit over here on this bench. And one triage nurse came out and said, let me get you a wheelchair. And my wife's like, no, I don't need a wheelchair. And I was like, take the damn wheelchair when it's offered. And so she said, okay. Got in the wheelchair, wheeled over, and she looked at me and went, I'm going to faint. And then her head just went back, and she was out. That scared the hell out of me because I thought she was dead. And I was like, and the nurses, God bless, she looked at that, put an ice pack on her neck, grabbed the wheelchair, and ran, did a Usain Bolt through the entire emergency room back to the doctors. And, she came out of it, and they got her going. And it turns out her platelets were shot, so she needed some additional stuff there. But that was a very traumatic event for me to witness that and see that. And it was kind of for my son, too, who happened to pick that day to come visit his mother in the hospital. And so that kind of upset him as well. Another traumatic event was we were at the tail end of stem cell treatment. And all of a sudden, having gone through this treatment for 9 months, all of a sudden, Sally was starting to show the same symptoms all over again. She was having trouble coming up with words. Her arms started shaking and moving. She would talk to you and then just stop. There was nothing there. That really freaked me out because it was like, we've been doing this for 9 months and we're right back to square one. So I pulled the nurse over, and it was a Sunday, naturally. I pulled the nurse over and I said, here's what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but you need to look at this. And she said, okay, we'll get the doctors in. And it was the next morning before they got the doctors in. But, this herd of doctors surrounded the bed. And I spent the night looking out the window and saying prayers. I had nothing else going. And the one doctor who was there, tall, redheaded woman, had braids like Pippi Longstocking. I'll never forget her. She just looked at me and she said, look, we've been giving her a pain medication that's morphine-based. That's attacking the weak areas in her brain where the cancer was. So we'll give her a different pain medicine and she'll be fine. And they did, and 24 hours later, she was fine. So it was like, that kind of treatment, which we experienced a lot of nurses and doctors explaining to us very straightforwardly what's happening, what's going on, here's what's going to happen. That was our complete experience, which I can't imagine doing it any other way or being in the dark all the time. But those three things really rocked me back on my heels more than anything else outside of just the overall low-level trauma of going through the whole process.
Because it's scary. That's a very scary situation when, we're hearing you tell the story and we already know the outcome. But when you're walking through that with someone, you don't know the outcome. You don't know what's happening. And it's very traumatic. And the thing that I've learned from doing this podcast about trauma is that gets stored in our brains and it can pop back up, as later. I've talked to people
as something completely different.
Yeah. I mean, as simple as like for you, maybe even entering a hospital that has the same smell as like the hospital that you were in with her,
right.
Or, maybe not, but maybe. And it's those little things that we don't think about, but it's like we're like those things. I know from my own, and my trauma looks completely different, but trauma in and of itself is the same in the sense of, you'll feel like you're kind of over it. You're on the tail end of it. and you kind of have this happy ending or whatever. And
Mm.
then there's later down the line, you don't even realize it. You're just going about your day to day life, and it's like you feel the trigger. And then you're right back in that place, that emotional place of like hopelessness, helplessness. I don't, all those
Both.
feelings, yeah, that you experience in the moment of that. And I think people fail to really understand what trauma is. And a lot of people just don't want to revisit it or even face it. But you
Because
talk,
it's scary to face it as an existing thing. I mean, you can feel it, and then once you're done feeling it, it's like, okay, I don't want to deal with that anymore. But you're right; it absolutely hangs in. If these days, if my wife is having trouble coming up with a word, there's that little switch in my brain that's just like, uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. And
familiar
it's
thought.
usually just, normal. We're getting old and we both have trouble remembering words. So but you're right, that little buzzer is there and is on duty 24/7. And the trick is having the right tools and the right things in your life to to be able to manage that and to deal with it, because it's not going to go away. But how am I going to deal with this? One of the things in the book, and the way the book is set up, is like it's set up as caregiver tips, and there's 21 tips for caregivers on there. The first one, which we were just talking about, is fear is normal. Get used to it because it's part of the deal. But the other one is I titled it Spirituality, Get Some. And I don't care what it is, religion, or if you want to, turquoise penguins dancing the merengue in Nebraska in the winter. That does it for you. Great. Fine. I don't care. But the number of nights I spent in the hospital corridor at 2 a.m, just sitting there and talking to my image of what my higher power is, and just saying, you know what, it's out of my hands. I don't have any control over this. Just watch out for the people that are taking care of her, and I'll run with whatever you got going. So that gave me a lot of comfort just to be able to say those things and connect that way.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. And then you mentioned earlier as well about, you saw a therapist. Did you find comfort in that? That therapist able to supply some of those tools that helped you navigate through this situation?
Yes, and the therapist I saw is one I'd seen previously, so she knew me and knew my background, and we chatted. And yeah, I had a lot to get out of some of the feelings that particularly the fear and the trauma that I was bottling up and not letting it come out, and just express that, these are the types of things I was feeling. One of the other things that we got really lucky with is that in Sloan Kettering, on each floor, they had a social worker. And, their job was to, check on the patients, and because the floor we were on was all neurology. It was all brain cancers. And the guy's name was Glenn. And I'd pop in and talk to him every so often just to talk to some non-patient. And there was one day when Sally was having a real bad day. She was just, because bad days are part of the deal. You're going to have them. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. And she was having a bad day. She was just fed up with this whole thing. And I walked into Glenn. I said, could you just go talk to Sally for a while? She's having a bad day, which he did, and he spent some time with her, and she felt better that afternoon. So having someone to talk to, again, whether it's a social worker, a therapist, a priest, a plumber, I don't care, just someone where you can get that out and talk about what you're feeling in a safe environment that you feel safe in, um, when you're not on duty, so to speak, is critical to making it through this.
Yeah, and whether that's a therapist or whether that is your spirituality, or some people find that even in the staff, the doctors and nurses, because some doctors and nurses lack in empathy, but some truly are called to that profession, and
Yes.
they have they have a way with words and a way with patients and a way with the families of patients. So um, I think that's great advice.
Nurses are outrageous. They're just the most outrageous people I've ever met in my life. And again, here's an area we got so lucky because every nurse that Sally had was just a sweetheart beyond belief. And my wife, being who she is, became kind of the den mother for all the nurses. So we would show up and come out of the elevator, and all the nurses would come out and surround her. And, this one would come in and talk about her kids and talk about her, it's just like she was like their favorite. So we, if you're, which taught me that if your attitude is good, because there's two ways to do this. You can be hopeful and optimistic, or you can be bitter and angry. And we saw both. We chose to be hopeful and optimistic. And if you do that and you treat people that way, even though you're feeling the fear, they're going to treat you back that way. And we found that with everybody. I mean, even the food service guy that came up and brought her food up, I pulled him aside one day and said, I'm really impressed with what you guys do. And it's wonderful. And he came in at one point and said, you need anything, even if it's not on the menu or in the kitchen downstairs, I'll go get it for you. Just a simple act of kindness to another person pays off in spades. So we just saw that over and over again.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's the gift that keeps giving, because
Right.
have you ever heard this thing of, and I may be quoting this wrong, but like where they have like these two jars of like water, I think it is, or plants. And one is like they speak negative things to it, and the other one they speak positive things to it. And over the course of time, the one that has been spoken to positively thrives, and the one that has been spoken to negatively gets
wilts.
dirty and wilts and all the things, right? So I do believe in energy, and I believe that our words have power, and I believe that you and your wife sitting on the side of patient, as a patient, you have the choice, like you said, to be positive and to be hopeful, which is a positive reaction. And then likewise, on the other side of that coin, you have the medical staff, which can be positive. And it's like going back and forth between two positive. I believe that is where people can thrive, and that positivity.
Right.
And I'm curious your thoughts about this idea of like people that get cancer or any disease that's bad. And I'm not saying that this is a all in one, but this is a component of like grasping the positive and grasping the hopefulness and the like, we're going to fight through this, that fighter mentality, versus fighting this hopelessness,
Right.
and telling yourself, oh, it's all downhill from here, and a lot of times, doctors will even come in and say, well, you have X amount of time to live. And I feel like that's one of the worst things they could say to a patient, and to caregivers, because it's like, it just breeds hopelessness. And it's like,
right.
How many times have you heard of people that they say you have 3 months, and then this person lives for, years beyond? Or you have
my mother.
Or you have someone.
My mother, she had ovarian cancer, and the surgeon came out after being in there all day and said, I can keep her comfortable for 6 months. And then she lasted another 5.5 years. She wasn't done. And my mom was in that positive frame of mind. It's like, no, I'm not done. I have some things I want to do. So we're gonna keep going with this. So it's and one of the ways we kept ourselves positive, and here again we were fortunate that Sally was mobile. She could take her IV stand and walk around, and we could walk around the corridors and see people that were much worse off than we were. They were really, in fact, her first roommate that she had this. It was her third visit. She'd gone through breast cancer. She'd gone through, I think it was lung cancer, and then she had cancer in her spine. And it was just like, you walk around and you think, there for the grace of God go I. I mean, we're so lucky that it could be so much worse than what it was. And we had to hold on to that just to say, okay, this is where we're going to go, and this is the way we're going to be. And one of the single biggest lessons I had to learn, and I know it's true for a lot of other caregivers, is you have to learn to ask for help. You don't have to do everything 24/7. You can't. You can't. You'll implode. You just can't do it. That took me a long time to learn the benefit of doing that, because people ask you all the time, what can I do? What can I do? And, the standard response is nothing. There's nothing you can do. But I tell people, look, sit down and make a list of things people can do for you. When my wife had the stem cell treatment, I said to my daughter and my sister-in-law, because they were both local, I said, you know what, make me some dinners and put them in Tupperware so I can stick them in the freezer so I don't have to go out every night. And, what a blessing that was to be able to have that in the hospital. So it's those little kind of things that can have a bigger impact than you think they're going to have.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that those things are huge, and also, just kind of going back to this idea of like the positivity and surrounding yourself with that is you have to be careful. I feel like when you're in any situation, especially a life-threatening situation like this, who you listen to. I had an aunt, and she had cancer, and it was a pretty aggressive type of cancer, and it spread really quickly. And she's my mom's sister. Her and my mom were very close, and the doctors told her, you have this amount of time to live, and she lost all hopelessness. Like, she lost all hope, and it was that amount of time, and then she passed away.
Right.
And it's just, going back to what you're saying about having that help and asking for help, but also being intentional about who you're letting speak those things over you. Because, especially when you're in a very vulnerable place, like you and your wife are in a very vulnerable place, her health is on the line. It's very scary. I'm sure you're having anxiety and panic attacks, and you're seeing things happen, and it's just, it's rough. And being able to have that positivity, whether it be from staff, from therapists, from just friends in general, kids, like having that extra push of like, we're going to be positive, we're going to fight through this, we're right here with you, we're holding your hand. That is so important. I feel like, but I would love to know kind of your thoughts about that, and if you have any tips as far as like kind of how to navigate that, as far as like what to listen to, who to listen to when you're in this situation.
One of the things I tell every caregiver, and it's one of the big tips in the book, stop looking things up on the internet. Because half of what's out there is wrong. All you're going to do is make yourself crazy. You don't have to know everything about whatever's going on. I mean, that's why the doctors go to school. That's why the nurses go to school. And it took me a while to grasp that, because I was looking everything up, and I was like, this is crazy, because I don't know if what I'm reading is true or not. And I got in the habit of, if I had a question, I would ask one of the nurses, or if the doctor was there, I'd ask the doctor. I mean, these are the people that are charged with caring for my wife and have gone through this treatment process. This isn't something new. They've gone through it. They know what to look for. They know what's going on. I'm going to get more straight answers out of them. And you pick and choose who you want to ask. You don't just ask some strange nurse down the cafeteria what's going on. But you're going to pick and choose the people that you ask, whose opinion you respect and trust. What's going on with this? And this is happening, and this seems kind of weird to me. So that's probably my single biggest thing, is just like, you don't have to know everything, but if you have questions, ask a professional person. Turn your computer off. Don't look it up. Trust me on this. My mom was, she was starting to go through treatment, and she had this book that was probably about 4 inches thick, and it listed all the prescription medicines in the world. And of course, it lists all the side effects with those medications. And the doctor would prescribe something, and she'd look it up and see all the side effects. She's like, I'm not taking that. And finally, my sister took the book away from her and said, "You're not going to look at anything up anymore. You're going to do what the doctor says, period." And that was probably such a smart move on my sister's part, because at that point, my mom acquiesced, and she started to get better. And like I said, lasted another 5 years. So um, you don't need to know everything. Trust a professional.
Hmm. And one thing I believe, and I'm curious your thoughts on this as well, but like I do believe that we have everything that we need inside of us too. And sometimes I think by going online and looking things up and being like it's good to know and do your little research, but like when you get so ingrained or like engulfed in that information, it's like social media. It's like,
Hmm.
it's very easy to get, you're getting all of these, like, it's like throwing spaghetti on a wall full of opinions. It's like so many opinions about stuff. So it's very good to kind of hone that in, but also just following your heart, following your like your gut when it comes to like, well, like what you guys did. They told you, hey, you have cancer, and you said, I need to take 24 hours. Like
Right.
that's following your gut, and I feel like don't discount that, because we do know our own bodies, and no one can feel your body the way that you do.
Right.
You're the one living in it. Um, and then
And
I
it's
also,
a quiet voice. The voice that's screaming at you or talking down to you in your head, that's not the voice to listen to. It's just a quiet, knowing voice that is just at peace and says, this is with the direction you should be going in. And that sometimes takes some practice to listen to.
mhm. And I want to know your thoughts on this as well, but this idea of support, because all of those things that we just talked about, like they're all valid and they're all important. But then we can't discount, we are talking about caregivers, we can't discount the support that having that, as a patient that's going through something that's very traumatic, that has to do with your health. You don't know what's going to happen from day to day. Having that support, having someone that is walking with you to encourage you on the days that you're down, or to go get you help when you are like you went and had to talk to the social worker for her
Mm,
on her behalf. And it's like that is huge as well, being able to like have that support. And I think caregivers play a vital, vital role. Um,
yeah.
what are your thoughts about that? And like, kind of like, what advice would you say to someone that maybe is going through this at this time, sitting in your shoes that you were sitting in 2014?
I'll never forget, there was one day, and because I was still trying to do work at my 40 to 50 hour a week job while we're going through this. So I would take a laptop up to the rec center they had in the hospital and do, work for 6 or 7 hours during the day. And there was just one day where I was just, just like Sally, I was not in the mood. Things were not going well at work, and I was just like in the ugly, ugly mood, and went down to the cafeteria, got something to eat, and got back on the elevator, and I'm just bitching and moaning. I hear this from outside, "Hold, please." And I was like, okay, fine, I'll hold the elevator. And woman walks in, 30, 28, 30, uh, pushing a wheelchair with a 10, 12-year-old girl hooked up to an IV, bald, lost all her hair, and got in the elevator. And I could see in the mom's eyes that glaze of like, oh my God, what am I doing? What can I do? And so I looked at the girl and I said, how you doing? She's like, I got one more treatment to go. I was like, well, stay tough. And in Sloan, there's an entire floor that's just the Children's Cancer Center. And they got off at that floor. And everything else that I was grumpy about just went away. Just imagining this woman going through this experience. And I can't imagine going through it with a child. That's the level of courage that I cannot comprehend. Just puts things in perspective so easily. And the whole experience will change your perspective on everything from your job to your relationships. It'll change your perspective on life, because now you've got to make room for cancer or dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever it happens to be. You've got to make room for that in your life now, and it's going to take some adjustment. And like I said earlier, it changes everything. So you have to stay focused on that and put self-care in there as well. It's not an easy task, but you've got to be able to balance. And the thing I was talking about earlier of getting organized, I had to get organized. I didn't want to give Sally the wrong drug at the wrong time, because they give you things like, take this drug, every other day, or take this drug every 6 hours. Take this drug when there's an R in the month. It's just like you never know. And I had to have it down on paper, or else I would just get hammered. And then I got one of those big Pendaflex folders, because they give you all this paperwork, and you got all the MRIs on disc, and this is when they still put them on disc. I'm sure they're all streaming now. But this massive information, you got to keep it all in one spot. Just to have it as a reference tool in case you need it. Two other things that I tell people that are probably the toughest things, but have to be done. Don't shy away from thoughts about money. You've got to talk about finances. Some people, like us, get real lucky with insurance, and we did. And some people don't, and some people can't. And, I've seen families, down in the lobby of Sloan Kettering just going at each other, figuring out how they were going to pay for this. And it's driving everyone nuts. Got to have that conversation fairly early on. You also have to have a conversation about death early on, because they're going to hit you coming in the hospital with a living will, and do you have this, and that kind of thing. And, of course, the patient's got to be thinking about this. I mean, they're going through this hideous disease. And so, you've got to have those conversations, and don't be afraid to bring them up and see how the patient is feeling about that, or talk about how you're feeling about it. Those are very important conversations to have that are going to stop any really nasty ones down the line, because it hasn't been talked about yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that goes back to the whole thing of stuffing feelings versus like feeling the feeling. And I think that's a huge advantage if you can start to look at whatever emotion or feeling or thing that you're dealing with, and be able to like feel that feeling and know you're not
Right.
wrong for having those feelings, and then release those feelings, because it's so much better to feel that in the moment and to stuff it back somewhere, to where now it's going to manifest in some way. Maybe it manifests in your own health. Maybe it manifests in, arguments or
Right.
turmoil within the family, or however that looks. But it's so important. I think this is the thing with trauma in general, but I can totally see how it works a lot in this circumstance as well.
Yeah. Because, we talked a little bit about this, the one pervasive feeling of the three main ones that comes up for a lot of caregivers is guilt. Particularly if a loved one passes away. There's such a level of guilt there, like, why didn't I do more, or how do I deserve to stay here and this person doesn't? And that brings up such a huge amount of shame, and that's tough for people to talk about a lot of the time, particularly when the shame comes in. And like I said, you got to find a safe place to talk about these things with whomever it happens to be.
That is great advice. And I'm sure that you are helping so many people through this process.
I
Talk
hope
to us a
so.
little bit. Talk to us a little bit about your book, where to find your book if someone was going through this and wanted to find more information.
Well, if you live in Delaware, there's a bookstore in Rehoboth Beach called Browse About Books. I've done a book signing there, and they have a bunch of them on the shelf. But the main location to get them is through Amazon. There is a Kindle version, and there is a book version, and the audiobook version is in production if I ever get it finished. So that's on the way. But that would be the place to go to get them.
Yeah. And we'll put that in the show notes as well so people
Cool.
can find that easily. So how long has your book been on the market now?
About 9 months now. It was end of last summer when I finally got it done and got the copies back. So it's been about 9 months.
Mhm. And your wife, is she she's proud of you for wanting to give back and help people through this process?
You know, she says to me all the time, she's like, "I couldn't have done that without you." And being the typical caregiver, I'm like, "Stop that! You could have too." But I feel she's not a BSer. She talks from her heart, and I know when she says that she absolutely means it. And it's gratifying to me to be able to be there and be that for her, or to be that for anyone if I have that opportunity, and can do something positive for them. That's the name of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Jim, I think you're doing a great thing by helping
Thanks.
other people, because I know that this is something that it's so easy to overlook. The general population, it's easy to overlook unless they've been through something like this. And I think just sharing your story brings about more empathy for someone who's maybe not experiencing it, but we know people that are, where we can be empathetic on both sides of the
Right.
coin. So,
Right. I hope so.
yeah. Do you have any like final thoughts or like one big idea you'd like to leave our audience with?
My brain is spinning.
I know it's a lot of things you want to leave with them. And
You know
we
what?
talked about a lot of things.
Whatever stage you're at in this, as a caregiver or a patient, wherever you are in your journey for this, you're doing okay. You may not think you are, but you're doing okay. You're doing what you need to do. You're doing the best you can do. And that's all anybody can ever expect from you, is just you do your best and you let go of the things you don't have control of, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other, one day at a time.
It's beautiful advice. And I totally agree. And have grace on yourself and mercy on yourself, because
Absolutely.
this journey is not, it's not one for the faint of heart. It's not easy. But Jim, I really appreciate you just coming on and sharing with us today. And I know that you're going to be an inspiration to so many. And just as this book gets in more people's hands, I know that it's going to just continue to give hope and
Well,
help
I
other
thank you for
people.
that.
Yeah, I think that's what we're supposed to do, as that's our human existence. And we go through things, and I don't think things are wasted. It's only wasted if we don't talk about it, or we don't share, or we don't reach back and help those that are struggling through it in the moment. So
I agree. If we're not going to help each other, then what's the point? And there's less and less of that happening if you watch the media all the time. But it's so important to, once you get down to the base human level, we're all we've got. So it's easy. It's easier than you think to reach out.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. And I will have all of your information in the show notes. And I'm so grateful that your story has a happy ending and your wife is thriving and doing well. But thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. The more of these I get to do, the more, and I never get tired of them. So it's great.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.